Welcome, gentle traveller, to a place where time moves slower than the steam curling from a porcelain cup. Settle yourself into whatever softness surrounds you and allow your breath to lengthen, slow and deepen, like the lazy current of a river drifting somewhere beyond the window. Tonight we will not hurry. There will be no urgency, no clamour, no need to remember anything that troubles you. Instead, we will drift gently, hand in hand with the past, into a city that has long since wrapped itself in the soft amber of memory. The year is 1855, and the city is New Orleans, in the warm hush before the world has fully awakened. We are stepping quietly into the cobbled lanes of the French Quarter, where the air smells faintly of roasted chicory, of damp brick, of old jasmine still clinging to forgotten wrought-iron balconies. Somewhere ahead, behind a heavy wooden door tucked between iron lanterns and a curling green vine, a coffee-house waits in the gentle dimness of early morning. Its windows glow softly with candlelight, golden and forgiving and dim. Inside, the day has not yet begun in earnest. The shutters are still half closed, the floorboards still cool beneath the rugs, the conversation still hushed and whispered. Allow your eyes to close or let them rest gently upon a single point. There is nothing to do here but listen, breathe and drift. Come, dear listener. The door is opening and the morning is waiting just beyond it. Before we cross the threshold and step fully into this golden hush of yesterday, allow me to whisper one quiet thought into the soft margin of your evening. If you find yourself drawn to these slow, candlelit corners of history, where the centuries soften and the past breathes gently beside you, consider becoming a quiet companion to this little hearth of stories. There is a small bell just beneath this tale shaped like a subscribe button, and another fashioned like a humble bell of notification. Should you ring them ever so softly, you will be invited back again and again to other forgotten rooms in other forgotten years, to gas-lit parlours in Victorian London, to dim apothecaries in old Vienna, to candle-strewn libraries in slumbering Edinburgh, to far-flung verandas in colonial Charleston. There is no urgency, no obligation, no need to do this now. You may stay precisely where you are, drifting along the river of this single morning, and that, too, is enough. But if your heart grows fond of this hush, of this slow unfolding of vanished worlds, then know that this small gesture is what allows the storyteller to keep wandering, lantern in hand, through the dim corridors of the centuries on your behalf. Now, with that gentle thought set aside, let us return to the door. It is heavy, painted a faded green that has weathered many decades of warm Louisiana rain. Its brass handle is cool beneath an unseen palm. Slowly, slowly the latch turns. The door eases open with a slow, gentle sigh, the kind of sigh that an old wooden door learns to make over many decades of welcoming travellers in from the soft Louisiana dawn. Its hinges, blackened with age and faintly flecked with the green patina of New Orleans humidity, give way without complaint, as though they have been expecting you since long before you knew you were coming. The faded paint upon its broad surface, once a brilliant bottle green in some forgotten season of the 1820s, has weathered into a tender, mossy hue, soft as the underside of a leaf, dappled here and there with the pale, ghostly outlines of where storms have kissed it again and again across the years. Small brass plate, no larger than the palm of a child, is fixed near the lintel, engraved in delicate cursive with the words Café Aurore, the Dawn Café, though the brass has darkened with age, and the lettering must be traced with the eye more than truly read. As the door drifts inward, a soft breath of warm, fragrant air drifts outward to meet you, carrying upon its current the deep velvet aroma of dark roasted coffee mingled with the gentle bitterness of chicory, the faint sweetness of warm sugar, the buttery whisper of fresh brioche, and beneath all of it, the soft mineral scent of old stone and slowly cooling candle wax. You step across the threshold without hurry, your footfall settling onto a wide pine floorboard that has been worn smooth and golden by 100,000 quiet morning footsteps before yours. The wood beneath you is warm, almost living, oiled by years of patient hands and lined with the soft rivers of its grain, every knot and seam telling some quiet history of growing forests upstate, of the slow river journey downstream upon a flat barge, Of the steady saw of a French carpenter long since laid to rest in the cypress shade of St. Louis Cemetery. A long woven runner of a deep wine red faded to the colour of crushed rose petals lies upon the floor leading inward, its pile soft and slightly compressed where the morning's earliest patrons have already passed. The light inside is dim and amber and forgiving, the kind of light that asks nothing of you. It comes from three sources only: the low golden flicker of two oil lamps mounted upon iron sconces along the wall, the soft glow of a brass-bound lantern hanging from the ceiling at the centre of the room, and the slow, patient seepage of pale dawn light filtering in through the partly shuttered windows that flank the entrance. The shutters, painted the same weathered green as the door, are drawn halfway, their wooden slats casting long, soft, slanting bars of pale honey light across the floor and along the lower portion of the walls, where they tremble faintly whenever a passer-by outside disturbs the air on the banquette beyond. Within those bars of light, fine motes of dust drift weightless and unhurried, turning gently like tiny suspended worlds, each one catching the gold and then surrendering it again as it drifts on. The walls, as your eyes begin to adjust to the gentle dimness, are panelled to waist height with dark mahogany wainscoting, polished to a deep, warm gloss by the slow attention of generations of cleaning rags. Above the wainscoting, the plaster rises in a soft, mellow cream that has aged to the gentle yellow of old parchment, here and there marked with the faintest hairline cracks that only add to its character, the way fine lines about the eyes of a kind face only deepen its warmth. Hung along the plaster at irregular intervals are small framed pictures, modest engravings and watercolours of the city as it appeared in younger decades, of riverboats with great paddle wheels, of cathedrals seen from across narrow lanes, of magnolia branches in heavy bloom. The frames are simple, black or gold-leafed, and each is slightly tilted as though the building itself has shifted gently over time, settling like an old man into his favourite chair. A low murmur of conversation drifts from within, soft as the rustle of silk against silk, in tones too gentle to make out clearly. There is the slow clink of a small porcelain spoon stirring against the inside of a thick white cup, the soft creak of an old cane chair as someone shifts their weight, the distant, almost dreamlike sound of a page being turned slowly in a newspaper made of thin and fragile paper. Beneath these sounds runs a deeper, even softer current, the gentle hiss and pop of glowing coals settling within an iron grate somewhere in the back of the room, and beyond that, the quiet music of water heating in some unseen copper vessel, a slow, almost melodic burble. The air, once you have begun to truly breathe it in, is layered like a fine perfume composed of patient hands. There is, first and most prominently, the warm and earthy embrace of the coffee, that bold, dark, beautifully bitter aroma that seems to settle into the bones and quiet the mind. Beneath it, the lower note of the chicory, woody and gentle, with a hint of toasted earth and something faintly sweet, almost like roasted fig. Above these, the light, lifting fragrance of warm pastries from somewhere deeper in the building, the buttery softness of croissants, the faint tang of orange flower water, the comforting whisper of vanilla and powdered sugar. Beneath all of these culinary notes, more architectural than gustatory, drifts the cool mineral breath of the building itself, of old plaster, of slowly drying lime, of the faintest trace of cedar from a chest somewhere within the walls. And weaving through all of it, the gentle breath of the morning city outside, a hint of damp cobblestone, of jasmine blossoms still cool from the night, of distant smoke from kitchen fires being kindled in the houses beyond. You linger upon the threshold for a long, slow moment, allowing your eyes to drink in the room before you. There is no clock visible upon the wall, and this absence is itself a kindness, for it gives you the unspoken permission to forget time entirely, to set it down at the door like a heavy coat. There is no rush here. There is no schedule that summons you. There is only this quiet, candle-lit chamber, breathing softly with the slow rhythm of its own patient existence, waiting with infinite gentleness for you to take one more soft step inward and let the door drift closed behind you. And so you do. The door eases shut with that same long, patient sigh with which it opened, the brass latch settling into its keeper with the faintest, most musical click, no louder than a single drop of water falling into a bowl of cream. Behind you, the world of the dawn-lit street recedes, becoming muffled and distant, as though seen through gauze. Before you, the soft amber world of the coffee house unfolds itself slowly, like the petals of a peony opening in warm sunlight, layer by gentle layer, inviting you with no urgency at all to come fully inside. Now that the door has closed gently behind you, and the hush of the room has settled around you like a softly draped shawl, allow your gaze to drift slowly upward, away from the floor, past the wainscoting, past the cream-coloured plaster, all the way to the ceiling far above. It is a remarkable ceiling, the kind that one no longer finds in the swift and modern buildings of younger eras, fashioned in the old Creole style of the early 19th century, when craftsmen still laboured as though they had been granted all the time in the world. The ceiling rises perhaps 14 feet above the polished pine floor, an unhurried height that gives the room its sense of breadth and patience. It is divided into broad, square panels by heavy wooden beams of dark, slow-grown cypress, beams as thick as a strong man's forearm, hewn from forests upriver and brought down by flatboat in the days when the river itself was the only true road. Each beam has been shaped with a hand adze rather than a milled saw, and if your eye is patient enough to trace the wood from one corner of the room to another, you may make out the faint, rhythmic dimples left by that ancient tool, like the gentle ripples upon a pond when a single leaf has settled upon its surface. The wood has darkened over the decades with the slow, layered varnish of wood smoke, candle smoke, pipe smoke, and the patient breath of countless human conversations, until it has become almost the colour of strong coffee itself, a deep, warm brown that swallows the lamplight and gives back only a soft, secret gleam. Between these heavy beams, the panels themselves are filled with a fine, hand-pressed plaster, painted long ago in a soft cream that has yellowed with age into the warm, mellow colour of old ivory. In the very centre of the room, suspended from a hand-forged iron hook driven into one of the great cypress beams, hangs the brass-bound lantern, a four-sided affair of leaded glass panels framed in tarnished brass. Within it burns a single thick candle of beeswax, its flame still and golden, scarcely flickering in the windless air, casting a soft, kindly halo of light that just barely reaches the four corners of the room before fading into amber dimness. Drop your gaze a little and you will find the upper walls hung with broad lengths of soft fabric, gentle drapery panels of unbleached muslin and faded damask, hung not as curtains across the windows but along the upper expanses of the long walls, both to soften the acoustics of the high-ceilinged room and to lend a quiet, almost ecclesiastical sense of warmth. The damask, where it catches the lamplight, reveals an intricate pattern of vines and stylized fleurs-de-lis, woven in threads of palest gold against a background that was once a deep indigo and has now faded to the soft, dreamy blue of a faraway sky just before evening. Where the muslin hangs in long, simple panels, it has the gentle, milky colour of cream poured slowly into coffee, and it stirs almost imperceptibly with the slow breath of the room, swelling and falling as though the building itself were quietly sleeping. Lower still, your eye begins to trace the deep mahogany wainscoting that runs along all four walls capped with a smoothly rounded chair rail. The wood has been cared for across the decades with linseed oil and beeswax polish, and it possesses a soft, silky lustre, the kind of finish that invites the hand to rest lightly against it for the simple pleasure of the texture. Here and there along its length, generations of patrons have left the most delicate of marks. A faint scuff at the level of a chair back where some gentleman long ago leaned often against the same spot to read his morning paper. Tiny chip near the floor where a cane has tapped against the wood, thousands of times in greeting, a softly polished gleam where shoulders have brushed in passing through the years. The floor itself is the slow river upon which the room drifts. Wide pine planks, 8 inches across, 12, sometimes 15, run the length of the room in long, unbroken stretches, joined by the simplest of tongue and groove. The pine has been oiled and waxed and walked upon for nearly 40 years, and it has taken on the deep golden honey color that only old softwood can achieve, its grain rising soft and visible like the slow current of a tea-colored bayou where furniture has stood in one place for many years. Faint pale ghosts mark the wood, the memory of a chair, the shadow of a cabinet, like the indentations a sleeper leaves upon a feather pillow. In one or two places, a knot of darker pine has worn down more swiftly than the wood around it, leaving small, round depressions like little bowls in which the lamplight gathers and pools. The room itself is not large. Were you to pace its length, it would measure perhaps 30 feet from front to back and 20 feet from wall to wall, although the high ceiling and the warm, dim light conspire to make it feel both intimate and oddly endless. Though it might continue gently into shadow forever if you only kept walking, it is shaped almost like a long rectangle, with the front of the room given over to small round tables for two, the middle filled with slightly larger tables seating four, and the back, dim and warm and almost cave-like, dominated by the great wooden coffee bar and its companion hearth, which we shall come to know more intimately in time. Two cast-iron columns, slender and black and ornamented with simple acanthus leaves at their capitals, rise from the floor at the third points of the room, helping to support the great cypress beams above. They were forged perhaps in one of the small foundries down by the river, and their surfaces are slightly pitted with the gentle texture of hand-cast iron, painted matte black so many times across the years that their forms have softened, like sea stones that have been turned and smoothed by patient water. Around the base of each column the floor is polished to a slightly higher gloss, where the proprietor's broom has circled them morning after morning in the quiet hour before opening. In one of the columns, near eye level, an iron hook has been embedded for the hanging of coats and shawls. From it presently hangs a single dove-grey travelling cloak of fine wool, the kind a gentleman might wear upon a damp morning, slightly damp at the hem, and faintly scented with the cool perfume of dawn fog. Beside it hangs a smaller object, a woman's bonnet of soft straw, trimmed with a length of pale violet ribbon, set carefully upon the hook, as though its owner has stepped only briefly away. These small belongings, suspended in this dim and amber light, give the room the quiet sense of being inhabited by the lives of others, lives that intersect this gentle space for only a few slow morning moments before continuing on into the unknown chapters of their own days. Above all of these details, presiding silently, the high ceiling watches with its long, slow centuries of patience, holding the warm air softly within the room like a great cupped hand cradling a pool of golden water. The whole architecture of the place seems to murmur very gently, "Be still, be still, be still." Drift, now with no haste at all, toward the far end of the room where the warm dimness deepens and the air grows even fuller with the rich, slow perfume of coffee. Here, occupying nearly the whole of the back wall, stands the heart of the establishment, the long wooden coffee bar, behind which the rituals of the morning unfold with the patient choreography of a quiet liturgy. The bar itself is made of a single great length of cypress, milled long ago from a tree that stood for 2 centuries in a swamp upriver before being felled by saw and axe and brought slowly downstream to become this counter. It is more than 14 feet in length, 4 feet deep, and its top has been polished to a soft water-smooth sheen by decades of cups passing across its surface, by elbows resting upon its edge, be the slow rags of the proprietor wiping away the small puddles of milk and crumbs of sugar that mark the comings and goings of every patient morning. The wood is the colour of dark honey shot through with veins of deeper amber, and an occasional hall of nearly black, where the cypress in its long life had grown around some forgotten knot or bend. Along the front edge of the bar, a slight curve has been worn into the wood at chair height, a gentle concavity polished smoother and brighter than the rest, where countless forearms have rested while their owners leaned forward in the soft conspiracy of conversation. The front of the bar is panelled with simple beadboard painted a deep forest green that has, like the door, mellowed with the years into the soft hue of pond water in shaded shallows. Set upon the surface of the bar, at well-considered intervals, are the small ceremonial implements of the coffee-maker's craft. There is a tall pewter pitcher with a long swan-necked spout, used for the slow pouring of hot milk. There is a small porcelain bowl filled with rough-cut sugar in irregular, glittering chunks, like fragments of pale ice. There is a wooden box of polished walnut, no larger than a prayer book, containing tightly folded squares of cheesecloth used for filtering the grounds. There is a small brass scale of 2 pans, balanced upon a needle-thin pivot, used to weigh out the day's measures of beans, its tiny brass weights arranged in descending order upon a velvet-lined tray. And there is near one end a single tall hand mill of dark wood and brass with a long iron crank, into which the morning's beans are poured before being slowly, patiently ground by hand. Yet of all the implements upon the bar, none commands the eye, the heart, or the imagination quite so completely as the great copper urn that rises in solemn majesty at its very centre. This urn stands nearly 3 feet in height, broad-bellied and dignified, fashioned from hammered copper that has aged into a deep rose gold blushed with the soft greens and verdigris of long use. Its curved sides are decorated with a low-relief pattern of laurel leaves and stylized waves, hammered by some careful tinsmith perhaps 30 years prior, perhaps longer. Around its waist runs a band of polished brass, engraved with a small pattern of fleurs de lis and the name of the maker in delicate cursive, Beaufort et Fils, Faubourg Marinier. Upon the very top of the urn sits a domed lid of brass capped with a small finial in the shape of a closed lotus bud, and at the front a curved spigot extends outward like the slender neck of a sleeping bird. Beneath this spigot, set into the wood of the bar itself, is a small porcelain saucer with a recessed centre, intended to catch the occasional drop of coffee that may escape the spigot's lips between pourings. This saucer, too, is a delicate object, painted with a circle of tiny blue forget-me-nots, its glaze finely crackled with the soft web of age. Within the urn, kept hot by a small alcohol burner concealed in its base, the coffee waits in dark and patient meditation. It is a strong New Orleans brew, bold and almost black, deepened with chicory in the long Creole tradition that grew during the long years of trade interruptions when pure coffee beans had been scarce. Tradition that has by 1855 long since ceased to be a thrift, and become instead a beloved virtue of the local table. The chicory, roasted to a deep mahogany, lends the coffee a fuller body, a velvet thickness, and a faint earthy sweetness that reminds some of fig and others of fresh-turned soil after a warm rain. As the urn rests upon the bar, faint wisps of steam rise from a small vent in its lid, drifting upward in slow, lazy spirals that catch the lamplight and turn briefly to gold before vanishing into the dim ceiling. Behind the bar, fixed against the back wall, rises a tall wooden cabinet, its shelves lined with the cups and saucers of the establishment. They are not all alike, for this is a coffee-house in 1855 and not a uniform palace. Instead, the cups are a slow accumulation of beautiful pieces gathered across many years, thick white porcelain demitasse cups for the strongest brews, larger cups of cream-coloured faience for the café au lait, delicate, translucent porcelain cups painted with sprays of pink roses for the most distinguished patrons, simple stoneware mugs in dark blue glaze for the labourers and rivermen, who occasionally drift in for a quick warming draught before going about their day. Each shelf is lined with a small cloth runner of unbleached linen, embroidered modestly along its hem with a simple chain stitch in pale blue thread. Tanned, each cup rests in its saucer at the precise angle dictated by the careful hand of someone who has clearly placed them there hundreds of mornings before. To the left of the cabinet stands the small alcove that houses the hearth, of which we shall speak more in time, and to the right of the cabinet hangs a small chalkboard within a black frame, upon which the morning's offerings have been written in a fine, sloping cursive done with a stick of pale chalk. The hand is the hand of the proprietor, a hand patient enough to write café noir, café au lait, café brûlot, chocolat chaud, brioche, beignet, croissant aux amandes in letters whose loops and tails are as delicate as the curl of vine upon a wrought-iron balcony. Below the chalkboard hangs a small framed mirror, no larger than a serving plate, its silvering speckled with tiny dark spots of age, useful chiefly to the proprietor when adjusting his collar, or smoothing his thin white moustache between the comings and goings of his early customers. Above the cabinet, near the ceiling, hangs a single long rope of dried red peppers, strung tightly together by their stems, a Creole tradition for warmth and welcome, their wrinkled crimson skins glowing faintly in the lamplight. The whole tableau, the bar, the urn, the cabinet, the chalkboard, the peppers, gathers itself together into a single warm, breathing portrait, the patient liturgical apparatus of a small sacred morning rite, repeated each day at this hour for nearly 40 years, repeated this very morning, repeated even now, repeated softly into the slowly waking dawn. Turn now ever so gently away from the warm, dim heart of the coffee bar, and let your gaze drift back toward the front of the room, toward the tall, slender windows that flank the green-painted door. There are 4 such windows in all, 2 upon either side of the entrance, each set deep within the thick brick walls of the building, their inner casings panelled in the same dark mahogany as the wainscoting, polished smooth by decades of soft hands resting upon their sills. Each window stands nearly 7 feet in height and a little less than 3 feet in width, framed within a graceful arch at the top, where the upper sash narrows into a curve like the gentle bend of a swan's neck. The glass within these windows is old, the kind of glass that craftsmen poured by hand into long iron tables in earlier decades, glass that has never lost the soft, watery imperfection of its making. Look closely, and you will see that each pane carries within it the faintest ripples and bubbles, tiny suspended worlds of distortion, so that when the eye passes through the glass and into the street beyond, the buildings sway and bend ever so subtly, though they were reflections shimmering upon a still pond rather than firm structures of brick and plaster. The panes are divided into small rectangles by slender wooden muntins, painted in the same forest green as the door, the paint worn thin in places to reveal the warm wood beneath, like the bare patches upon a beloved jacket. The shutters upon the inside of each window have been folded back into their pockets within the casing, and the lower sashes have been raised by perhaps 4 inches, allowing a gentle current of cool morning air to drift in across the sills, mingled with the scents of the awakening quarter. The sills themselves are broad and deep, of the same dark mahogany as the casings, and upon each one rests some quiet small item placed there by the proprietor as gentle ornament. A small terracotta pot of basil upon one, its leaves fragrant and waxy and just lightly damp from the dew, slender vase of blue and white china upon another, holding a single fading sprig of tuberose upon a third, a stack of 3 slim leather-bound volumes, the topmost being a worn copy of the Fables de La Fontaine, its spine cracked with the soft fatigue of much loving use, upon the fourth, small unlit oil lamp of clear glass, its wick neatly trimmed ready for the dimmer hours of the evening. Lean now gently toward one of these windows and let your eyes drift outward through its rippled glass, through the slender bars of soft dawn light angling through, into the slowly waking world of the quarter beyond. The street outside is narrow, no more than 12 feet across, its surface paved in old square cobblestones the colour of weathered slate, each one rounded and polished by long generations of passing carriage wheels and horse hooves and barefooted children. Between the cobbles, narrow channels of darker stone collect the slow dew of morning, glimmering faintly like the threads of a silver web. Here and there, small patches of moss and tender green weeds have crept up between the stones, softening their hardness and giving the street the faint impression of a stone tapestry, slowly being reclaimed by the patience of nature. Across the way, directly opposite the coffee house, rises another building, 3 stories tall, its lower face painted a deep blush pink that has faded into the gentle hue of crushed strawberries cooked into preserves. Its second-floor balcony of black wrought iron juts forward over the street in a long, slender shelf, its railings forged into a delicate pattern of curling vines and small stylized roses, the work of some master ironsmith whose hands have long since stilled. From the balcony's railing trail several long, soft cascades of star jasmine, their tiny white blossoms scattering a faint, sweet perfume into the morning air, mingling with the deeper notes of coffee and brick. Above the balcony, the upper stories of the building are punctuated by tall, louvered shutters painted a soft sage green, most still closed against the lingering cool of the night, though here and there one set has been opened and tied back with a simple cord, revealing the dim interior of a chamber where perhaps someone has just begun the slow ritual of waking. Single window high above shows the briefest glimpse of a woman's hand lifting a porcelain pitcher of water before a long lace curtain stirs softly and conceals her again. Down the length of the street, your eye drifts past the pink building to others ranged beyond it. A tall, narrow shop with a faded yellow facade and large bay windows whose rolling shutters are still drawn for the night. Low cream-coloured townhouse with a small green courtyard glimpsed through a wrought iron gate. A building of soft butter colour whose entrance is marked by a hand-painted sign bearing the word boulangerie in tall letters of pale gold. From the boulangerie drifts already the faint scent of warm bread, travelling on the gentle current of the morning air to mingle with the aromas issuing from the coffee house. Above all of these buildings, the sky has begun, very softly, to lighten. It is not yet the full blue of morning, but the long, slow blush of pre-dawn, a colour that begins as the deep violet of an iris petal at the edge of the horizon and rises through pale mauve, through dusty pink, through the faintest blush of apricot, until at the highest reach overhead it remains still the soft, patient grey of a pearl. Single thin line of golden light traces the rooftop of the building opposite, where the rising sun has just barely begun to touch the topmost edge of the slate tiles, and the wrought iron weather vane upon the chimney, shaped like a small leaping fish, has begun to gleam softly as though awakening to the gentle warmth. Down upon the street the early life of the quarter has begun, but it has begun slowly, almost ceremoniously. Solitary figure passes with a small handcart, his footsteps echoing softly off the cobbles, his cart laden with bundles of fresh-cut flowers from the markets at Faubourg Marigny, tall stems of gladiolus wrapped in damp newspaper, fragrant clusters of sweet olive bound with twine, modest bouquets of pale roses with their stems wrapped in cones of brown paper. The wheels of his cart make a soft, rhythmic creak as they roll over the uneven cobbles, a sound like the very pulse of the early morning street. A black cat slips from beneath the wrought iron gate of the cream-coloured townhouse, pausing to stretch its long body against the cool stone of the banquette, before continuing on its silent rounds, its eyes the same gold as the lamplight within the coffee house. Somewhere, far in the distance, the slow tolling of a single church bell begins, perhaps from the cathedral upon the square, perhaps from the chapel of the Ursulines, marking the hour with 7 slow, sonorous notes that drift through the streets like soft circles spreading upon the surface of a pond, reaching at last the windows of the coffee house and filling the room with their gentle, lingering hum. Allow yourself now to drift with the patient curiosity of a gentle dream, away from the windows, away from the slow song of the dawn-lit street, and back into the dimmer interior of the coffee house. But this time we shall not pause at the front tables, nor at the bar, nor at the hearth. Instead, we shall continue past all of these to the very back of the establishment, where, half concealed behind a long damask curtain of the colour of faded rosewater, an archway leads into the hidden inner rooms that few but the most regular patrons ever come to know. The curtain hangs from a slender brass rod, its hem brushing softly upon the pine floorboards, its surface embroidered along the edges with a quiet pattern of acanthus leaves in pale gold thread that has tarnished over the years into a soft, ghostly bronze. You part the curtain with a gentle hand, and immediately the air shifts in subtle texture. It grows even cooler, even more hushed, even more steeped in the layered aromas of patient years. You step into a short, narrow corridor lined on both sides with dark wood, the floor of plain brick, the ceiling of plastered cypress beams. The corridor turns once, gently, and opens into the first of the inner alcoves, a small reading parlour scarcely wider than a generous closet, but filled, like a tiny coffer, with treasures. This alcove is dominated by a single round table of dark walnut, no more than 3 feet across, its surface bearing the soft scars and ring marks of countless cups set down by countless hands across the decades. 3 wooden chairs surround it, not matching but companionable, one of carved cherry with a faded red velvet cushion, one of bentwood in the Viennese style with a canid seat that has begun to soften in the middle, one of plain pine, sturdy and unadorned, painted long ago in a soft grey. Upon the table rests a small pewter inkwell with a hinged lid. Beside it, a porcelain cup containing 3 quill pens whose feathers have grown ragged from use. Beside that, a stack of cream-coloured writing paper, soft to the touch, watermarked with a faint emblem of crossed laurels. Above the table hangs a small oil lamp of green glass with a polished brass collar, its wick presently trimmed and unlit, its glass bowl filled with clear oil that catches the faintest gleam of distant light. Upon the wall beside the table hangs a single shelf of well-loved books, perhaps 15 volumes in all, leather-bound, of various sizes, their spines worn and gilded. Their titles, where still legible, suggest the broad and curious tastes of those who have lingered in this quiet place. A French translation of Plutarch's Lives, a slender volume of Lamartine's poetry, a copy of Don Quixote in Spanish, a worn anatomical atlas, slim treatise upon the cultivation of citrus trees, a leather-bound collection of theatrical playbills from the Théâtre d'Orléans, a dog-eared book of Creole folk tales, a small French-English dictionary, a thin pamphlet upon the manners of the table. Each book waits patiently upon the shelf for the next quiet hand to draw it down, the next gentle eye to read its pages, the next slow morning to bring it back into the world. The walls of this alcove are papered in a soft faded toile in the old French style, depicting in pale blue upon ivory a repeating pastoral scene, a shepherdess leaning beside a stone well, a small boy chasing a goose across a field, a willow bending over a quiet pond, all of it repeated again and again across the walls in the gentle hush of pattern. In one corner of the alcove stands a small hat stand of black iron, whose 4 hooks are presently occupied only by a single forgotten wool scarf of charcoal grey, its ends fringed with delicate twisted tassels. You leave the reading parlour, parting another small curtain at its rear, and step into the second of the inner alcoves, a long, narrow room reserved for the quiet conversations of small parties. Here 4 small tables are arranged in a single row along one wall, each set against the panelling in the manner of a railway dining car of the era, with 2 chairs opposite each table. Above each table hangs a small mirror framed in dark wood, useful for the diner who wishes to glance at her own appearance without turning her head, but more often serving simply to catch and multiply the warm gleam of the wall sconces and to deepen the apparent length of the narrow room. The wallpaper in this alcove differs from the first, being an old-fashioned striped pattern in cream and the palest sage green, with thin gold lines running between the broader stripes like delicate threads of warm light. Near the far end of this corridor a final small archway leads into the kitchen, but we shall only glance at it through the doorway, for we are not here to study the labours of the day, but only to drift among the gentler corners, yet the glimpse alone is worth a moment. The kitchen is broad and brick-floored, lit by 2 tall windows that face onto a small interior courtyard. Its walls are whitewashed plaster gone to soft cream with the patina of cooking smoke, hung with copper pots and tinned saucepans of every size, suspended from a long iron rack above a great central work table of scrubbed pine. Massive cast-iron range, black as a starless midnight, dominates one wall, its surface already warm with the morning's first fires, atop which a heavy enamelware kettle has begun to give forth a gentle plume of steam. Near the work table a wooden flour bin, lidded with hinged pine boards, stands ready, and beside it a marble slab where the morning's croissants are being shaped by an unseen hand whose presence is only marked by the soft tap-tap-tap of dough being patted and folded. Beyond the kitchen, through a half-open Dutch door, one may glimpse the small interior courtyard of the building, a square of perhaps 20 feet to a side, paved in old red brick that has worn round and smooth and softened by years of damp Louisiana mornings. Within the courtyard rises a single small tree, a sweet olive, its leaves a deep glossy green, its tiny pale blossoms releasing a slow, sweet, almost peach-like fragrance into the cool air. Around its base, low pots of mint and rosemary cluster upon the brick. Wrought iron table and 2 chairs stand against one wall, their black paint slightly weathered, their surfaces scattered with the morning's first fallen leaves. Upon a cord strung between two iron hooks, several spotless white linen towels hang to dry, swaying just slightly in the soft current of dawn air, their hems embroidered with the small cipher of the establishment, the letters CA in fine cursive blue thread. You stand for a moment in the dim corridor, looking through the half-open door into this courtyard's gentle world, and then slowly you turn back. There is no need to linger here. The kitchen will fill itself in time with the song of butter sizzling upon iron, the low murmur of the cook to her assistant, the slow ceremonial rhythm of breakfast preparation. For now the back rooms have given you what they came to give. The soft assurance that the coffee house extends in many quiet directions like a small dim labyrinth of patient hospitality, every corner of it breathing the same warm, unhurried breath. Drift now back into the main room of the coffee house where the dawn has begun, gently, almost imperceptibly, to grow stronger beyond the rippled glass of the tall windows, and where the very first patrons of the morning have begun to arrive in slow, deliberate numbers, each entering with the quiet reverence appropriate to the early hour. The little brass bell above the green door, no larger than a child's fist, gives a soft single chime as the door eases inward, and a gentleman steps through with the slow gait of one whose body remembers many such mornings before this one. He is perhaps 60 years of age, slender and a little stooped, dressed in the modest but well-tailored manner of a Creole gentleman of comfortable but not ostentatious means. Upon his head sits a low-crowned beaver hat of soft charcoal, slightly battered along the brim from many decades of being lifted to acquaintances upon the street. He wears a long frock coat of dark brown wool, almost black in the dim lamplight, double-breasted and cut to his form, beneath which gleams the dignified pale gleam of a starched linen shirt and a narrow cravat of plum-coloured silk knotted at the throat in the manner that has been popular in the city since the days of his own grandfather. His trousers are of a slightly lighter brown, gathered at the waist with a modest leather belt, his boots polished to a soft used gleam. He removes his hat slowly, as though performing some small daily liturgy, and hangs it upon one of the iron hooks near the door beside the dove-grey cloak and the violet-ribboned bonnet already there. He turns toward the room, nods almost imperceptibly to the proprietor behind the bar, and walks with quiet, measured steps to the small round table by the second window from the door, the table that has been his for nearly 30 years. The chair receives his weight with the slow creak of an old companion. He sets down upon the table a slim leather portfolio that he has been carrying beneath his arm, and with the patience of long practice he begins to remove from it the small treasures that comprise his morning ritual: a folded copy of l'Abeille de la Nouvelle-Orléans, the city's French-language newspaper, a small leather-bound notebook in which he writes occasional lines of his own composition, a slender pencil of polished cedar, a pair of thin spectacles in a tortoise-shell frame, which he polishes gently upon the corner of his cravat before placing them upon the bridge of his nose. The proprietor, who has seen this gentleman come and go for nearly 3 decades, does not need to ask what he wishes. The familiar order, the café noir with 2 small lumps of rough sugar, will be brought to his table within 4 or 5 minutes, accompanied by a single warm croissant upon a small porcelain plate, and a second smaller plate bearing a single cube of sweet butter sliced thin enough that it will melt upon contact with the warm crumb. The gentleman folds open his newspaper, smooths it gently across the table with both hands, and lowers his eyes to the columns of fine print, his lips moving very faintly as he reads. The bell above the door chimes once again, and this time it is a young woman who enters, perhaps 22, walking with the soft, careful step of one who has come to the city from elsewhere and has not yet wholly accustomed herself to its rhythms. She wears a long dress of pale dove-grey cotton with a high collar of plain white lace, and over it a short jacket of darker grey wool, cut close to the figure in the modern fashion of the season. Her bonnet, of soft straw trimmed with a single silk ribbon of a deep moss green, is tied beneath her chin in a small bow whose ends fall just below her collar. She carries in her gloved hand a small reticule of black silk embroidered with a faint motif of forget-me-nots, and beneath her other arm she clutches a slim envelope, sealed in pale blue wax that she has clearly carried with her for some time. She pauses just within the door, her dark eyes adjusting to the dim amber light. And then she crosses the room with quiet steps, choosing the small table in the corner farthest from the door, the table where the corner alcove of the wall affords a sense of gentle privacy. She seats herself in the chair facing the room, lays the envelope carefully upon the table before her, and folds her gloved hands lightly upon it, as though waiting for some small inner courage to rise. The proprietor approaches her with the soft, attentive grace of a man who has spent his life learning to read the moods of strangers, and she requests in a soft voice tinged with the gentle accent of Mobile or perhaps Pensacola, a café au lait and 1 slice of pain perdu with cane syrup. The proprietor inclines his head and withdraws. Soon the bell sings yet again and a third patron enters, this one in greater haste than the first two, though even his haste by the standards of any other place would be deemed leisurely. He is a man of perhaps 40, broad-shouldered, with dark wavy hair and a moustache trimmed in the cavalry style. He wears the practical attire of a working merchant, a dark green waistcoat of fine wool over a white linen shirt rolled at the cuffs, a long apron of unbleached cotton folded over his arm, and the dark trousers and stout boots of one who spends his days upon the wharves. He has come from his establishment along the riverfront, where in another quarter of an hour his employees will begin arriving for the day's labours, and he has come for one quick cup of café noir before returning to his counting-house. He nods cordially to the proprietor, drops a small silver coin upon the bar and stands at the bar itself rather than taking a table, leaning slightly upon the polished cypress with one elbow as he waits. Demitasse of strong coffee is set before him within moments, accompanied by a small saucer, and he drinks it slowly, in 3 or 4 contemplative sips, savouring the warmth and the chicory's earthy weight before he sets the empty cup down upon the saucer with the soft, satisfying click of porcelain upon porcelain. By now the room has begun very gently to populate itself. A pair of clergymen in long dark soutanes have entered together and taken a table near the bar, conversing in low tones in a melodic Italian that the older patrons recognise as the cadence of priests from the cathedral. Solitary elderly lady, dressed all in black with a small black mantilla over her white hair, has settled at a far table with her knitting basket beside her chair, drawing forth a long ribbon of pale yellow wool and the gleam of 2 ivory needles. Young apprentice with ink-stained fingers has slipped in to drink his coffee standing, glancing nervously at a small pocket watch that he has produced from his waistcoat. The room slowly has come into the quiet music of its inhabitants, each soul drawn into its own small island of warmth, all of them held together within the larger soft archipelago of the dim candle-lit chamber. Now turn your gentle attention to the proprietor himself, the slow presiding spirit of this whole soft establishment, the man whose hands have shaped day after day the rituals that you have begun to witness. His name, although seldom spoken aloud within these walls, is Monsieur Etienne Augustin Beauchamp, and he has stood behind this bar for 37 years. He is a man of perhaps 63, neither tall nor short, of a slender, upright build, with the patient carriage of one who has learned to spend long hours upon his feet without ever appearing tired. His hair, once a deep raven black in the early daguerreotypes of his youth, has whitened gradually into the soft colour of fresh snow at dusk, kept neatly combed back from his high, calm forehead, slightly silvered above the temples and gathered at the nape with the simple discipline of a man who has long since ceased to vanish his attention upon mirrors. His face is finely lined in the manner of a face that has smiled often but not extravagantly, and his small white moustache, trimmed to the precise width of his upper lip, lends him the quietly elegant air of a French valet long since promoted into a master in his own modest right. His eyes are a soft faded blue, the colour of the sky just after a long rain, gentle in their attention and slow in their movement, and behind them lies the patient knowledge of someone who has watched the comings and goings of 1,000 morning suns through the windows of this single room. He wears this morning, as every morning, a long apron of unbleached linen freshly laundered the night before, its strings tied behind his back into a precise double bow, its hem reaching almost to the tops of his polished black shoes. Beneath the apron, his shirt is white linen, ironed crisply by the same patient hand that has ironed his shirt since his wife passed in 1841, his own hand. He wears a dark waistcoat of charcoal wool, plain and well-fitted, and beneath the apron a thin black cravat tied in a simple knot at his throat. The sleeves of his shirt are folded back precisely twice above his wrists, no more and no less, exposing forearms that are slender, sinewy, and lightly tanned from many years of standing near the open kitchen door in the warmer months. Watch him now as he goes about his morning. The light in the room is still dim, and the first of his patrons have only just begun to arrive, but he has been here since long before the bell first chimed. He arrived, as he does every morning, at 4 o'clock, an hour at which the city is still wrapped in the deep velvet hush of the night, and the streets carry only the faintest echoes of distant footsteps and the slow drip of dew from balconies. He let himself in through the back gate of the courtyard, lit a single candle from the embers of last night's banked fire, and began the slow ceremonial work of preparing the coffee-house for its waking. Now, 2.5 hours into that morning's work, he moves with the unhurried grace of practiced habit. He pauses at the bar, his slender fingers checking the level of coffee within the great copper urn by laying his palm gently upon its bronze flank, judging the warmth and the slight vibration of the liquid within. Satisfied, he turns to the small mahogany box beside the urn and lifts from it a folded square of fine cheesecloth, examining it briefly in the candlelight before laying it across the brim of a smaller silver pitcher, into which he intends to filter a fresh measure of grounds. Beside the pitcher, the hand mill of dark walnut and brass waits, its wooden hopper already filled with a measured weight of beans, and he rests his hand upon its iron crank, turning it slowly, 10, 20, 30 patient revolutions, his face serene with the quiet meditation of the sound, the soft grrrs, grrrs of the millstones at their slow grinding labour. The aroma that rises from the freshly ground beans is so deep, so warm, so utterly luxurious that even the patrons across the room turn their heads, as one to receive it like a benediction. The Creole gentleman by the window lifts his eyes briefly from his newspaper, allowing the fragrance to fill him before returning to his reading. The young woman at the corner table breathes in slowly, and her gloved hands relax just a little upon the surface of her envelope. The merchant at the bar simply closes his eyes for a moment, then opens them again, smiling faintly into his coffee. Monsieur Beauchamp tips the freshly ground coffee into the cheesecloth-lined pitcher, lifts a long-handled copper kettle from a small alcohol burner upon a side shelf, and begins the slow, careful pouring of the steaming water in a thin, golden, almost ceremonial stream. He pours in 3 patient circles around the inside of the pitcher, watching the grounds bloom and rise and settle, his lips faintly pursed in concentration. The aroma intensifies tenfold, filling the dim room with an almost sacred, full-bodied fragrance, deepened by the chicory and lifted by the brightness of the new morning beans. While the coffee drips, he turns to other small matters. He moves to the chalkboard upon the wall behind the bar and lifts down the list of yesterday's offerings, taking in his hand a soft cotton cloth and wiping the slate clean, with 3 slow, gentle sweeps. He lays the cloth aside, takes up a fresh stick of pale chalk from a small brass dish, and begins, in his careful, sloping cursive, to write out the morning's offerings. Café noir, café au lait, café brûlot, chocolat chaud, brioche, beignet, croissant aux amandes, pain perdu, tartine de confiture. The letters form themselves under his hand with the calm precision of one who has written them 10,000 times. Next, he moves to each of the oil lamps along the wall in turn, adjusting their wicks ever so slightly, that the flames may burn neither too tall nor too low, neither smoking nor flickering, but giving forth the steady, soft, golden glow that the room requires. With each lamp, he pauses for a moment, watching the flame, listening to its near-silent breath, ensuring that the chimney is clean and the reservoir adequate. He moves with the slow attention of a sacristan upon the morning of a feast. He returns at last to the bar, where the freshly poured coffee has finished filtering, and lifts the cheesecloth from the pitcher with a single graceful gesture, folding it neatly aside. He pours the new coffee into the great copper urn through a small brass funnel inserted in its top, the dark liquid joining the patient reservoir of the morning's blend with a soft, contented hiss. He replaces the lid of the urn, draws a deep, almost soundless breath through his nose, smiles to himself a small, private, almost imperceptible smile, and turns at last to the room, ready, as he has been every morning of his life since the year of his 19th birthday, receive whatever quiet souls the dawn may send him. Let your attention drift now away from the proprietor's hands and into the very substance of the coffee itself, that warm, dark, fragrant nectar around which this entire establishment turns like a small system of moons revolving around a single golden sun. To understand this coffee, to truly know it as the morning patrons of the quarter know it, you must travel backward in time and outward across distance, following its long, slow journey from the high green volcanic slopes of distant lands to this small dim cup upon this single morning table. The beans themselves come from many sources, blended by Monsieur Beauchamp according to his own quiet science of taste. Some have arrived from the highlands of Hispaniola, where they were grown upon terraced plantations in the cool air of the mountains and dried under the slow Caribbean sun upon broad tarpaulins of unbleached cotton. Others come from the volcanic soils of the south of Mexico, where they have ripened upon shrubs that have been pruned by hand for 3 generations. Still others trace their origin to the slopes above the Bay of Santos in distant Brazil, where great schooners loaded their fragrant burlap sacks for the long journey north. And a few, the most precious of the blend, come from far Mocha across the eastern oceans, beans whose ancestors were the first ever sipped as coffee centuries ago in the slow afternoons of Constantinople and Cairo. These beans arrive in the port of New Orleans aboard merchant ships, packed in burlap sacks of perhaps 150 pounds each, the sacks themselves stamped with the names of the plantations and the ports of origin in faded inks of red and blue. They are unloaded upon the long wooden wharves of the Mississippi by stevedores whose songs and rhythms have been part of the city's soundscape for as long as anyone can remember. Then they are carted by mule-drawn drays through the narrow streets of the Vieux Carré to the small warehouses of the greengrocers and the coffee merchants. From there, in turn, they are conveyed to the back doors of the city's coffee houses, of which the Café Aurora is one of the older and the more respected. Once the green beans have arrived in Monsieur Beauchamp's small storeroom, they are not yet ready to be brewed. They must first be roasted, a labour that he undertakes once a week, every Saturday afternoon, in the small back courtyard upon a low brick brazier set with a hand-cranked iron drum of his own design. He roasts each varietal separately, attending to the changing colour of the beans through a small glass window in the drum, listening for the telltale crackling sound that the coffee craftsmen of every nation know as the first crack, the soft, popcorn-like report of the bean expanding within its parchment. He stops the roast at varying degrees, lighter for the Hispaniola, deeper and oilier for the Brazil, deepest of all for the Mexican beans whose chocolatey notes he prizes for the foundation of his blend. Once the beans have cooled upon broad sheets of brown paper laid out upon the courtyard's brick floor, he gathers them into glass jars, each labelled in his careful cursive, and stores them in a small dark cabinet behind the bar. The blending itself he performs each morning, weighing each varietal upon his tiny brass scale. 3 parts of one, 2 of another, 1 of a third, then folding the blended beans together gently in a wooden bowl with a long wooden spoon before pouring them into the hopper of the handmill. But the coffee of New Orleans, as every patron of the Café Aurore knows, is more than coffee alone. It is coffee married to chicory, in the long Creole tradition that has by 1855 ripened into a beloved local custom. The chicory itself, the dried and roasted root of the common chicory plant, has been used in France for over a century, originally as a thrifty extension of the costlier coffee bean. But in New Orleans it has long since transcended thrift and become a thing prized for its own sake. It lends the coffee a fuller, rounder body, a slight earthy sweetness, a deeper colour the shade of polished mahogany rather than ordinary brown, and a velvet richness that some claim cannot be matched by pure coffee alone. The chicory upon Monsieur Beauchamp's shelf comes to him from a small French Creole cooperative across the lake at Mandeville, where the long taproots are dug from the sandy earth in the autumn, carefully washed, sliced into thin discs, dried slowly upon broad wooden trays in well-ventilated barns, and then roasted to a deep mahogany in much the same fashion as the coffee. The roasted chicory is shipped to him in small wooden barrels, each holding perhaps 20 pounds, and he draws from these barrels the precise measure for each morning's blend. His blend is a careful one, the result of many years of patient experimentation, a blend that the regulars of the Café Aurore have come to consider in their quietest hearts the finest in the city. It is 2 parts ground coffee to 1 part ground chicory, no more and no less, and it is to this blend that the morning's hot water is added in the slow ceremonial pour you witnessed earlier. The brewing itself is an art that requires patience above all virtues. Monsieur Beauchamp does not believe in haste. The water must not be boiling when it touches the grounds, lest it scorch them and rob them of their finer notes. Rather, it must be just below the boil the water from a kettle that has been removed from the alcohol burner some 30 seconds before pouring. The pour itself must be slow in 3 patient circles around the inside of the cheesecloth-lined pitcher, the first pour smaller than the second smaller than the third, allowing the grounds to bloom and release their first burst of fragrance before the bulk of the water descends. The drip must be unhurried, taking perhaps 4 full minutes from the first drop to the last, and the resulting coffee, dark as river mud and twice as fragrant, is then transferred into the great copper urn, where it will be kept warm but never boiling for the duration of the morning. When poured into a cup, this coffee is so dark that one cannot see the bottom of the cup through it, even when held to the lamplight. Its surface gleams faintly with a thin, oily golden sheen, the natural oils of the freshly roasted beans, and when stirred with a small spoon, that golden sheen breaks into 10,000 tiny constellations of light that drift slowly across the dark, like stars across a midnight pond. To it may be added, according to the patron's preference, a measure of hot milk steamed gently in the swan-necked pewter pitcher, or a lump or two of rough-cut sugar from the small porcelain bowl upon the bar, or, more rarely, a thin curl of orange peel for the café brûlot. But in its simplest and most beloved form, the coffee is taken simply noir, straight from the urn, dark and warm and slow, the very essence of the morning held in a small white porcelain cup. Drift now away from the dark, fragrant world of the coffee itself and into the lighter, sweeter, more buttery realm of the pastries that accompany it, those small round companions of the cup that the Café Aurore offers each morning to its slowly arriving guests. The pastries do not appear upon the tables by accident. They are the careful labour of Madame Sidonie Roussel, the establishment's long-time baker, a woman of perhaps 50 years who arrives each morning at 3 o'clock, an hour even earlier than the proprietor himself, in order to begin the long, patient ritual of dough and butter and oven that will fill the back rooms of the building with the warm, sweet breath of her work. She is a small woman, perhaps no more than 5 feet tall, with soft greying hair pinned up beneath a white kerchief, hands floured to the wrists, an apron always dusted with the pale snow of pastry flour, and a face that lights with quiet pleasure when her morning's work emerges golden and fragrant from the oven. She does not often venture into the front room, preferring the gentle solitude of her kitchen, but her presence is felt in every cup, every plate, every aroma that drifts into the dim amber hush of the dining room. The proprietor, when carrying her pastries to the front, pauses always to murmur to her some small word of appreciation, and she accepts it with the soft, secretive smile of a woman who has been thanked thousands of times across a long lifetime of skillful labour, and who still finds in each thanks a small, unexpected warmth. The pastries themselves are several, and each has its own quiet history within the establishment. The croissant, that most beloved of all French pastries, is made here in the slow, classical method. The dough laminated by hand with cold butter through 3 patient turns over the course of a single morning. Madame Roussel works the dough upon her marble slab in the kitchen, folding the cold butter into the flour and water mixture, rolling out the long rectangle, folding it like a letter into thirds, allowing it to rest beneath a soft linen cloth for half an hour, then folding again and again. The result, when finally baked, is a pastry of dozens of microscopic layers, golden and shatteringly crisp upon the outside, soft and pillowy and warm within, with a fragrance of melted butter so deep and so satisfying that one need not even taste the croissant to know it is the finest in the quarter. Beside the plain croissant, she offers also the croissant aux amandes, the almond croissant, in which a day-old croissant is sliced in half, soaked briefly in a syrup of sugar and orange flower water, filled with a soft frangipane cream of almonds, eggs, and butter, and rebaked until its top is dotted with caramelized almond slivers and a dusting of fine powdered sugar. To bite into one of these is to taste all at once the deep, buttery resonance of yesterday's bread, the bright floral perfume of the syrup, the soft and yielding sweetness of the almond filling, and the gentle crunch of the toasted nuts upon the surface, all married together in a small, plump, golden crescent of perfection. She bakes also the brioche, a richer and more ceremonial bread made with eggs and butter and a touch of milk, kneaded the previous evening and allowed to rise slowly through the cool night in a great earthenware bowl draped with damp linen. Each morning she divides the dough into small round buns or shapes it into tall fluted molds, brushes the tops with beaten egg yolk, and bakes them to a deep glowing amber. When sliced, the brioche reveals an interior so soft, so fine-crumbed, so almost cake-like that it requires only the lightest scrape of butter and perhaps a thin smear of preserves to become a small, perfect breakfast unto itself. And then there are the beignets, those square pillows of yeasted dough fried in hot fat until they puff into golden cushions, and are then heaped with so much powdered sugar that the very act of eating them must be undertaken with a certain solemn carefulness, lest the white snowdrift upon the diner's lap and cravat. Madame Roussel fries them in small batches throughout the morning, lifting them from the hot fat with a long wire spider, draining them upon brown paper, and dusting them through a small wooden sifter that releases the powdered sugar in a slow, gentle cloud. Each beignet is the size of a small playing card, hollow and warm within, golden and slightly crisp upon the outside, and when broken open releases a faint cloud of warm steam that smells faintly of vanilla and yeast and the bright, almost perfumed sweetness of the cane sugar. She bakes also the pain perdu, the lost bread made of yesterday's bread soaked in a custard of eggs, milk, sugar, and a touch of vanilla, then fried in butter until each thick slice is golden upon both sides and slightly puffed in the middle. It is served upon a small porcelain plate, dusted with sugar, and accompanied by a small pewter pitcher of cane syrup, dark and slow as molasses, drawn from a sugar plantation across the river. To pour the cane syrup over the pain perdu is to watch a small dark river spread across a golden landscape, soaking gently into the soft custard within, a small, sweet, edible geography of the morning. Beside these several richer offerings, she lays out also the simpler tartines, slices of plain country bread, baked yesterday in a great round loaf with a thick crust and a soft, chewy interior, sliced thickly and accompanied by a small white dish of fresh butter and a second small dish of fig preserves of her own making. The fig preserves are dark amber in colour, thick and slightly sticky, dotted with the tiny dark seeds of the fig, and perfumed with a hint of lemon peel and a touch of cinnamon. Upon a slice of buttered country bread, a small spoonful of these preserves spreads softly, glistening in the lamplight, like a slow, sweet dawn upon the snow of the butter. All of these pastries and breads are presented at the bar upon a series of small porcelain platters, covered with cloches of pressed glass that fog ever so slightly with the warmth of their contents, the cloches lifted only when a patron makes a request, releasing each time a small puff of warm, fragrant air. From the moment they are baked, the pastries do not last long, for the patrons of the Café Aurore are in their quiet way devoted, and Madame Roussel must on most mornings replenish her offerings 2 or 3 times before the breakfast hour has passed. By the time the church bells of St. Louis Cathedral toll the hour of 9, only the heels of the brioche and the last of the powdered sugar-dusted plates remain, and Madame Roussel in her kitchen has already begun to think upon what tomorrow's morning will require, kneading new dough, weighing new butter, beginning again, tomorrow as today as yesterday. The slow, sweet pulse of the morning's bread. Now allow your gentle ear to drift into the slow music of the room's conversations, that soft and layered murmur that has been rising and falling around you since the moment you stepped across the threshold. New Orleans in the year 1855 is among the most polyglot cities upon the American continent, and within the dim amber walls of the Café Aurore, the languages of the world weave together in a quiet tapestry of voices, each thread distinct, each thread a part of the larger gentle song. The dominant language of the establishment, as in much of the French Quarter at this hour of the morning, is French itself. But it is not the French of Paris or Lyon. It is the French of the Creoles, that softer, more melodic French that has grown up across 150 years of Louisiana sun and Caribbean cross-pollination. A French in which certain old-world consonants have softened almost to silence, which certain vowels have grown longer and rounder, in which words from Spanish, Wolof, Choctaw, and English have woven themselves quietly into the lexicon. To listen to the Creole gentleman at the second table speak to the proprietor in this gentle dialect is to hear a French that is at once familiar and strange, a French that one might describe, were one searching for an image, as French steeped in honey and slowly dripped through warm air. Between the two clergymen at their table near the bar, the conversation flows in melodic Italian, the dialect of Genoa softened by years spent in the southern climes, their voices low and reverent as they discuss matters of parish administration, the upcoming feast of St. Joseph, and the slow ongoing repair of a crack in the cathedral's western wall that has worsened in the recent rains. Their Italian moves like a slow stream with frequent gestures of the hand, even at this small hour, the elder of the two occasionally tracing a small invisible circle upon the table with his forefinger, as though laying out a quiet plan upon its surface. At the bar, the merchant speaks his orders in English, but it is the English of the city's Anglophone commercial class, lightly accented with the soft southern vowels of the cotton coast and tinged with the brisk rhythm of Liverpool, where his own father was born. He addresses the proprietor by his title Monsieur, slipping seamlessly between the languages as so many in this city do, treating French and English not as separate worlds but as two slightly different rooms of the same comfortable house, walking back and forth between them without hesitation. In a corner farther back, a small group of 3 men have settled at a slightly larger table, having entered together perhaps 10 minutes ago. They are merchants from the Spanish trade, 2 of them from Havana and 1 from Vera Cruz, and they converse in a fluid Caribbean Spanish, full of warmth and quick laughter, discussing the previous evening's performance at the Théâtre d'Orléans, the price of cigars, the rumours of new cargo arriving upon the Estrella del Mar later in the week. Their Spanish is quick but not hurried, decorated with frequent small gestures, soft chuckles, and the occasional Italian word borrowed for emphasis. Closer to the door, 2 younger women have entered together, having met each other on the street outside, and now sit at a small table, sharing a single porcelain cup of chocolat chaud between them. They speak in soft, rapid French, but it is French of a slightly different texture than the older Creole gentleman's, lighter, more fashionable, peppered with the latest expressions imported from the salons of Paris by way of the most recent novels and ladies' periodicals. They speak of bonnets, of a forthcoming ball at the Salle d'Orléans, of a new portrait studio that has opened upon Royal Street, and of the rumoured engagement of a mutual friend, all in tones so soft and rapid that the words almost merge into a continuous warm music, like the sound of small silver bells being rung in a distant garden. Beneath all of these conversations, woven softly into the larger fabric of the room, runs a deeper layer still, the soft, rhythmic murmurs of the kitchen, where Madame Roussel speaks to her young assistant Justine in a Louisiana French so old and so distinctively local that some of its turns of phrase would be unintelligible even to a Parisian visitor. She gives directions in soft, patient cadences. Passez-moi le beurre, ma fille, oui comme ça, doucement, doucement. From the courtyard, the soft singing of an unseen voice, Perhaps one of the household servants drifts faintly into the room, an old Creole song in a melodic patois, its words half forgotten, but its melody as familiar as the bricks of the courtyard themselves. Even the silences in the room have their own languages, their own dialects of quiet. The Creole gentleman at his table by the window reads in silence, but his silence is the silence of a man absorbed in thought, who occasionally lifts his pencil and adds a brief annotation in the margin of his newspaper. The young woman in the corner with her envelope sits in silence too, but her silence is different, a silence of waiting, of gathering courage, of allowing the weight of whatever is contained within that pale blue sealed letter to settle gently into her morning before she opens it. The merchant at the bar drinks his coffee in the silence of a man preparing for a long day's labour, gathering his strength inwardly before stepping back into the bustling world of the wharves. The proprietor, in his careful tour of the room, addresses each patron in their own language. He speaks French to the older Creole gentleman, English to the merchant, Spanish to the Caribbean traders, his Spanish marked by the formal phrasing of an old French education, but warm and welcoming all the same, and the lightest, most graceful of Italian to the clergyman, Toff, which he knows perhaps 100 phrases learned across decades of welcoming priests and travellers from the Mediterranean. He moves between languages without effort, a gentle ambassador of the morning, his small, calm voice always at the same low, soothing volume, his words always chosen with the care of one who has spent his life in the careful balancing of strangers. The total effect of all these conversations, all these languages, all these silences, is a slow, gentle music that seems to rise and fall like the tide, never sharp, never raised, never urgent. No voice in the Café Aurore has ever been raised in anger, or so the regulars will tell you. The very acoustics of the room, with its high ceiling and its softening drapery and its thick carpets and its absorbing wainscoting, seem to discourage anything louder than a comfortable murmur. Even the laughter, when it comes softly, a low chuckle from the merchants, a small bright giggle from one of the young women, a quiet sigh of mirth from one of the clergymen, as his colleague tells a small joke about the parish bursar. It is the kind of room in which a stranger might sit unnoticed for hours, hearing a dozen languages without understanding a single one in full, and yet feeling completely at home, because the language beneath all the languages, the language to which every tongue here ultimately bows, simply the language of slow, attentive, peaceful morning spoken in every cup, every breath, every gentle pause between words. Allow your eye now to return, with the soft attention of a kindly observer, to the young woman in the corner table, the one who entered earlier carrying the slim envelope sealed with pale blue wax, and who has been, for these many quiet minutes, sitting motionless with her gloved hands folded gently upon it. Her café au lait has been brought, in a wide cream-coloured faience cup the colour of moonlight upon parchment, and the pain perdu has been set before her, upon a small porcelain plate dusted with powdered sugar. She has thanked the proprietor with a soft smile, but she has not yet eaten, nor drunk, nor moved her hands from the letter beneath them. The young woman's name, although she would offer it only quietly were one to ask, is Mademoiselle Cécile Aurélie Lavallée. She is 22 years of age, the daughter of a small mobile bay merchant who deals in oysters and citrus and modest quantities of imported French fabric, and she has come up the coast to New Orleans this past week to stay with her widowed aunt upon Dumaine Street, while certain matters of family correspondence are resolved. The letter beneath her gloved hands arrived only yesterday afternoon, brought to the door of her aunt's home by a young postal courier with a brass-buttoned uniform, and she has been carrying it with her unopened for more than 18 hours. It is not, you may be relieved to know, a letter of grief. The pale blue wax bears the seal of a young man named Henri Théodore Beaumont, the son of a Vieux Carré silver merchant, with whom Mademoiselle Lavallée has been corresponding now for some 7 months. They met for the first time at a modest spring soirée in Mobile 2 springs ago, were reintroduced at the Christmas reception at her aunt's house this past December, and have, through the slow magic of the postal service, exchanged some 38 letters in the months between. She has memorized his handwriting, the slight rightward tilt of his loops, the small flourish at the bottom of his G letters, the way he signs his name with a slow, generous curve beneath the Henri. She knows his correspondence, as one knows the face of a beloved friend. This letter, however, is heavier than its predecessors. She can feel its weight beneath her gloved fingers, and she suspects, with the soft, almost prophetic intuition of one who has read many of the same hand's lighter offerings, that within this folded paper lies the question that has, for some weeks now, been hovering invisibly around the edges of all their gentler exchanges. She has not opened it because she has wanted very much to choose the place and the moment in which the question, when read, would be received with a proper grace and inner stillness. And she has decided, somewhere in the slow mathematics of her heart, that this morning, this dim amber coffee house, this quiet far corner table would be the proper threshold upon which to meet whatever the letter contains. Watch her now with the most respectful gentleness as she at last lifts her gloved hands from the letter and lays them softly in her lap. She removes her gloves finger by finger with a slow grace that is in itself a kind of prayer, folds the gloves carefully and lays them upon the chair beside her. Her hands, free now of their pale silken sheaths, are slender and pale, the nails neatly trimmed, the fingers slightly trembling, though she would not admit the trembling to herself. She lifts the letter, turns it slowly in her hands, and presses it lightly to her lips for a moment. Not in the manner of a kiss, but in the manner of a small private invocation, before laying it once more upon the table. She takes up the slender silver letter knife that the proprietor has brought to her table, along with her coffee, a small, elegant blade with a pearl handle, its edge dulled by long, courteous use. She slips the blade beneath the corner of the wax seal and with a slow, careful pressure, lifts the seal away from the paper. It comes free in a single piece, a small disc of pale blue wax bearing the impressed insignia of the Beaumont family arms, and she sets it gently upon the corner of her plate, where it will remain throughout the rest of her breakfast as a small kept relic of the moment. She unfolds the letter slowly, smoothing it open upon the table with both hands. The paper is the fine cream stationery of a well-bred Vieux Carré household, watermarked faintly with the cipher of its maker, and the letter itself extends across 2 full pages in the familiar, beloved handwriting of Henri Théodore Beaumont. She begins to read, and as she reads, her eyes move slowly down the page, her lips occasionally moving in faint silent recitation of certain phrases, her cheeks pale before, slowly warm into the soft hue of a tea rose. Small smile, almost imperceptible, begins to gather at the corner of her mouth, then deepens, then trembles ever so slightly, then steadies into a smile of full and settled joy, the kind of smile that does not announce itself but simply settles upon the face as evening light settles upon a window sill. She reads the letter once, then twice, then a third time, each reading slower than the last, allowing the words to sink more fully into the quiet places within her. By the third reading, her eyes have grown soft and shining, and a single small tear, no larger than a pearl, has gathered at the corner of one eye and traced a slow, glistening path down her cheek to her jaw, where she catches it gently with the corner of a folded handkerchief drawn from her reticule. The tear is not a tear of sorrow, it is a tear of arrival, of the slow recognition that the long invisible weight she has been carrying through these many months of correspondence has just been gently lifted from her shoulders by the asking of a single, long-anticipated question. She lifts her cup of café au lait now, for the first time since it was set before her, and takes a slow sip. The warmth of the coffee, the soft milkiness of it, the faint earthy sweetness of the chicory, all spreads through her like a small private warmth that she will, for the rest of her life, associate with this morning, this corner, this letter. This answer that is even now beginning to take shape within her own heart, the answer that she will, when she returns to her aunt's house upon Dumaine Street, sit down to write upon her own pale cream stationery, sealing it with her own family's wax, and posting it back into the slow, generous hands of the city's postal service. For now, however, she does not write, she does not move, she simply sits in her corner of the Café Aurore, on this slow morning of 1855, the letter open before her, the cup warm in her hand, the powdered sugar slowly settling upon the pain perdu upon her plate, and she allows herself for once do nothing but feel the gentle settling of joy into the quiet rooms of her own life. While Mademoiselle Lavallee sits in her quiet corner, slowly absorbing the warmth of her unfolded letter, allow your gaze to drift back across the dim amber room to the second table by the front window, where the old Creole gentleman has settled into the long, deliberate, almost sacramental ritual of his morning newspaper. His name, although it is no more often spoken aloud than the proprietor's, is Monsieur Jean-Baptiste Hyacinthe Devereux, and he has been reading his morning paper at this same table for 31 of the 37 years that the Café Aurore has stood. He arrived in this city in 1818 as a young man of 23 from the parish of Saint-Domingue by way of Cuba, and his first New Orleans morning was spent at this very establishment. Then only a year old, drinking his first cup of New Orleans coffee at this very window. He has not, since that morning, missed more than perhaps 50 mornings here in 3 decades. And most of those absences were occasioned by the seasonal yellow fevers, the few weddings of his nieces, and one long-ago journey to Paris in his 34th year. Today, as on every morning, the Café Noir has been brought to him in a small white porcelain demi-tasse cup, accompanied by 2 small lumps of rough-cut sugar upon a small saucer and the warm croissant upon its accompanying plate. He has not yet touched any of them, for his ritual requires a particular sequence and a particular pace, and Monsieur Devereux is a man who has, across his long life, refined his sequences and his paces to a degree of ceremony that would do credit to a court of any kingdom in Europe. First, he removes his thin spectacles from their tortoise-shell case, polishes them gently upon the corner of his plum-coloured cravat, and places them carefully upon the bridge of his nose. Then, with both hands, he unfolds his newspaper to its full broad spread, smoothing the pages flat upon the table with 3 slow, deliberate strokes of his open palms. The newspaper is La Belle de la Nouvelle-Orléans, the city's longest-running French-language paper, printed upon thin and slightly translucent paper that smells faintly of fresh ink and pulp, its columns set in a small dignified type, its masthead ornamented with a small line drawing of a beehive, the symbol of industry and community for which the paper has been named. He does not begin as a younger man might, with the front page or the headlines of the day. He begins, instead, at a place that he has chosen long ago as the proper threshold of his morning reading, the small section near the back of the paper devoted to the obituaries and the announcements of births, weddings, and family arrivals. This is, he has come to feel, the truest pulse of the city, the slow, patient record of its human comings and goings, and he reads it not with morbid attention, but with the slow, attentive interest of a man who has watched generations rise and fall around him, who knows that the names upon these small columns are not merely names, but the gentle threads that bind together the quiet fabric of his neighbourhood and his time. He reads each entry slowly, his eyes moving down the page with the patience of a man for whom there is no hurry. Madame Hortense Beaumont, née Boulinier, paisiblement décédée à son domicile, rue Bourbon, le 7 mai, à l'âge de 73 ans. He pauses upon this name, for he knew her father in his own youth, an old Royal Street notary, who had once helped his own family settle a small matter of inheritance many decades ago. He inclines his head, almost imperceptibly, in a small private gesture of remembrance, then moves on. Monsieur et Madame Théophile Galatas annoncent la naissance de leur fils, Émile Auguste, le 6 mai. He smiles gently. Mariage célébré le 5 mai en l'église Saint-Louis, Mademoiselle Adélaïde Bourgeois et Monsieur Lucien Charbonnet. He nods softly, having known the bride's grandfather as a fellow merchant in younger years. He turns the page and now begins the second course of his morning reading, the small section devoted to the comings and goings of the great river steamboats. He reads these announcements not because he travels, for he no longer travels, but because the great paddle-wheelers of the Mississippi have always been, for him, the silent messengers of the world. Tanned to know what has arrived in port, and what is shortly to depart, is to know the breath of the city itself. He reads the names of the steamboats with the soft pleasure of one, for whom such names are like the names of old acquaintances, the Princess of the Bayou, the Belle of Memphis, the Magnolia, the Saint Cecile, the Iberville. He notes which has arrived from St. Louis, which has departed for Natchez, which has just brought down a load of cotton from the upper plantations. Only after these gentler sections has he completed does he allow himself to turn at last to the front page, with its larger announcements of municipal affairs, of the doings of the Common Council, of the slow progress of the new drainage works in the lower quarters of the city, of the latest arrivals of trade goods at the Custom House. He reads these articles slowly, his lips moving faintly, occasionally lifting his pencil to underline a phrase, or to add a small annotation in the margin. He has, across the years, accumulated several thick leather-bound notebooks in which he records his slow morning reflections upon what he reads, and these notebooks, kept in a cypress chest in his small parlour upon Burgundy Street, will one day, when he has gone, be of considerable interest to those who study the slow inner life of the 19th century vieux carré. Only when he has completed his full reading, perhaps 40 minutes after he first unfolded the paper, does he at last permit himself to begin upon his coffee. He drops the 2 small lumps of rough-cut sugar into the demi-tasse with the slow precision of a chemist, stirs the cup 3 times with a small silver spoon, taps the spoon gently upon the rim and lays it upon the saucer. He lifts the cup to his nose, inhales the dark fragrance of the coffee for a long moment with closed eyes, and then takes the first sip, a small, slow sip, holding the warmth in his mouth for a moment before swallowing. Small breath escapes him then, a soft sigh that is at once the breath of a man tasting something beloved and the breath of a man tasting his own long life, distilled into a small dim cup at a window in his 31st year of mornings here. He breaks the croissant gently with both hands, allowing the small flakes of buttered pastry to fall upon his plate, and lifts a single piece to his lips. He chews slowly, his eyes drifting toward the window, toward the slowly brightening street beyond, toward the soft golden touch of the rising sun upon the wrought iron balcony across the way. His face, in the dim amber lamplight of the room, is the face of a man entirely at peace with his morning, entirely at peace with his city, entirely at peace with the slow, gentle passing of his own measured days. Drift now, dear listener, away from the figures of the room, away from the young woman with her unfolded letter, away from the old gentleman with his slowly turning newspaper, away from the merchants and the priests and the morning's small parade of patrons, and allow your gentle attention to settle for a while upon something that has been present in this room from the beginning, present even before the first patron arrived this morning, present even before the proprietor first lit the lamp at 4 o'clock in the silent dark, present even before the building itself was raised upon its plot of ground in the 1810s. Allow your attention to settle upon time itself, and upon the slow, patient music that time has been making within these walls. Time, in a place like the Café Aurore, does not move as it moves elsewhere. It does not march, it does not run, it does not strike sharply upon the hour with the thin, clear voice of a railway clock. Instead, it moves the way a river moves through a still bayou, that is to say, scarcely at all, or at least scarcely at all in a manner that one can perceive at any given instant. Leaf upon the surface of such a bayou seems to remain in the same place for an hour, for 2 hours, for half a morning. But if one returns at the end of the day, one finds that the leaf has, after all, drifted some considerable distance, gently, without ever appearing to move. So it is with the slow time of this small dim room. Consider how many mornings have passed beneath this high cypress-beamed ceiling. The Café Aurore opened its doors in the spring of 1818, and across the 37 years between that morning and this one, the building has welcomed, with the patient grace of a kindly grandmother, somewhere between 13 and 14,000 mornings, give or take a handful of mornings closed for funerals or feast days, or the rare hurricane that drives even the most loyal of patrons indoors. Each of those mornings has brought with it the same slow ceremonial preparations, the same lighting of lamps, the same grinding of beans, the same patient bloom of grounds beneath a careful pour of warm water, the same chime of a small brass bell as the first patron of the day enters with a soft greeting. And yet no 2 of those mornings have ever been precisely alike, and none ever will be. Think of all the cups of coffee that have been poured here. If one estimates conservatively perhaps 300 cups upon a quiet morning, perhaps 500 upon a busier one, Then across 37 years the establishment has poured something on the order of 5 million cups of coffee, 5 million small ceremonies of warmth, 5 million dark mirrors held briefly at the lips of strangers, 5 million small fragrant inhalations across 37 autumns and 37 springs. Each cup, when it was poured, felt to its drinker like a singular and unrepeatable event, a small private consolation, a pause in the long roll of the day, and so it was for the cup and for the moment that drank it. And yet here now, in the dim amber of this single morning, all of those 5 million cups have settled together into a kind of invisible river, a slow, soft current of warmth that flows beneath the floorboards and behind the wainscoting and within the very mortar of the walls. Think of the conversations if one were to gather in some impossible archive every conversation that has been spoken within these walls across the 37 years, what an immense library of human exchange one would possess. The murmured engagements, the soft farewells, the slow business deals, the discussions of the latest novel or the latest opera or the latest political pamphlet, the gentle gossiping of neighbours, the careful conferences of clergymen, the slow advice of grandfathers to grandsons, the quiet first conversations of new friends. Each conversation, when it occurred, was a small island of meaning complete in itself. And yet here today all of those conversations have settled together into the gentle hum of the room, the soft acoustic memory of the walls, a hum that one cannot hear directly but that one feels in the bones, in the way the air seems already inhabited the moment one steps inside. To Protestantin, the way one knows, without being told, that one is in a place where many quiet souls have already been before. Time, in such a place, ceases to be the relentless taskmaster that it sometimes appears to be in the swifter rooms of the world. It becomes instead a gentle elder companion, a slow custodian of small moments, a patient gatherer of warmth. The clocks of Paris and London and Boston measure time in the sharp ticking of seconds, but the Café Aurore measures time in the slow rhythm of brewings, in the slow turning of newspaper pages, in the slow rising and falling of the murmur of voices, in the slow creaking of chairs, the slow pouring of milk, in the slow drifting of dust motes through golden bars of dawn light. Each of these is a small unit of time, but it is a unit of time as understood by the body and the heart, not as understood by the mechanical mind. There is a great kindness in this slower understanding of time. It does not rebuke us for being still. It does not press us toward the next hour. It does not measure our worth by the speed of our labours. Instead, it gently insists in its quiet way that the morning is large, that the cup is sufficient, that the bread is enough, that the conversation does not need to be hurried, that the letter does not need to be answered before it has been received, that the page of the newspaper does not need to be turned before it has been fully read. It insists, in short, that the value of a morning lies not in what is accomplished within it, but in what is allowed to happen within it. And so as you sit somewhere in your own quiet evening, listening to the slow music of this small dim room of 1855, you may find that the gentle understanding of time that lives within these walls has begun, very softly, to settle into your own breath. Your own breathing slows, your own muscles, tense from the longer rhythms of your own day, begin to release. Your own thoughts, hurrying perhaps from one preoccupation to the next, find that they have nothing in particular to hurry toward here, in this slow hour, in this slow place, in this slow century that is no longer demanding anything of you. You may feel perhaps a small unfamiliar sweetness, the sweetness of being permitted for a few minutes to inhabit a morning whose only purpose is its own quiet unfolding, a morning that asks only that you be present within it, with the same patient grace with which Monsieur Beauchamp pours his slow coffee, with which Mademoiselle Lavallee reads her unfolded letter, with which Monsieur Devereux turns the gentle pages of his familiar newspaper, here now in the long warm patience of the dawn. Continue, if you will, in this slow philosophical drift, and turn your attention now to a thought that lies nearby, the thought of time itself, the thought of all the lives that have touched this small dim room across the years. For a place such as the Café Aurore is not merely a building, it is, in a quiet and unspoken sense, a great gentle vessel that has held within itself the quiet passages of countless human lives. Each chair has been sat in by hundreds of bodies. Each cup has been raised to hundreds of lips. Each spot upon the floor has been crossed by 10,000 soft footfalls, and every one of those bodies, lips, footfalls belong to a single soul, with a single name, a single story, a single inner garden of memory and longing and small daily care. Imagine for a moment all the souls who have crossed the green-painted threshold of this coffee house in its 37 years. Some of them came every morning for decades and were welcomed by name. Others came only once, in passing, and their names were never known and never asked for. Some came in joy, fresh from a small triumph, the sale of a cargo, the arrival of a long-awaited child, the news of a happy engagement. Others came in quiet sorrow, perhaps in the hour after a difficult letter received, perhaps in the small days following the loss of a loved companion, seeking only the gentle, anonymous warmth of a familiar place to soften the edges of their grief. The room has welcomed them all. The room has not asked them what they brought with them. The room has only offered them the same slow, patient cup, the same dim amber lamp, the same warm, fragrant air, the same soft acoustic embrace that asks nothing and judges nothing and demands nothing. Consider, for instance, the small girl who came here in 1832 with her mother in the long melancholy spring of the cholera epidemic, when the city was racked by sickness and many homes were closed and many tables stood empty. She was perhaps 7 years old, her hair tied in 2 long brown braids, and she sat at the table now occupied by Mademoiselle Lavallee, sipping a small cup of warm milk, sweetened with honey, while her mother quietly drank her coffee and watched the street through the window with eyes that held within them the long, careful attention of one who had already lost 2 of her children to the fever and was praying every silent moment that the third would be spared. That mother prayed in this room. That child was spared. In this room, or at least in the slow weeks that followed her many mornings here. That child grew up. That child, today in 1855, is herself a mother of 3, sitting in a small house upon Esplanade, drinking her own morning coffee in her own kitchen, occasionally remembering, when she does not know why, the dim amber walls of a coffee house in the worst spring of her own childhood. Consider the young apprentice who came here in 1841, having just received word that he was to be promoted from his clerk's stool to a position of greater responsibility in the offices of his employer. He sat at the bar where the merchant sits this morning, drank a single demi-tasse of café noir, did not speak to anyone, but smiled to himself the entire while, his eyes shining, his foot tapping faintly against the bar's lower rail. That young man is now, in 1855, a man of 41, the head of his own firm upon Tchoupitoulas Street, with 3 sons of his own, one of whom now stops in occasionally at the Café Aurora on his way to his own clerkship, drinking the same demi-tasse at the same bar, never knowing that his father did exactly the same thing in the same place a quarter of a century before. Consider the elderly travelling clergyman from Lyon who came here once, just once, in the autumn of 1827, having disembarked from a steamship that very morning after a long Atlantic crossing. He stayed in the city only 3 days, on his way to a missionary posting in the upper Bayou country. But he came to the Café Aurore 3 times in those 3 days, each time taking a café au lait and a single brioche at a small table near the window. He never returned to the city, and he died in the Bayou country some 16 years later. But in the small leather-bound journal that he carried with him to his quiet grave, there is, among the many entries of his slow missionary years, single short paragraph written upon the 3rd of his New Orleans mornings. J'ai passé ce matin dans un petit café près de la cathédrale. Il y avait une grande paix dans la salle comme dans une chapelle. Je crois que je m'en souviendrai toujours. I passed this morning in a small coffee house near the cathedral. There was a great peace in the room as in a chapel. I believe I shall always remember it. Consider the elderly widow who came here every Tuesday morning for 14 years between 1839 and 1853, always at the same hour, always to the same chair, always for the same single demi-tasse and a small dish of fig preserves spread upon a slice of country bread. She spoke to almost no one, yet the staff knew her by sight, knew her order, knew her preferred chair, brought her cup before she even thought to ask for it. When she died in the long, quiet summer of 1853, The proprietor learned of her passing only when she failed to appear for 3 Tuesdays in a row, and he sent his young assistant to make discreet inquiries at her usual address. He was told by the housekeeper that the widow had passed peacefully in her sleep on a Sunday afternoon. The proprietor, when he heard, did not say anything. He simply walked to her usual chair, set upon its empty seat a single small white carnation from the small vase upon the bar, and left it there for the rest of the morning. The room remembers, or rather the room does not remember in any active sense, but it holds somehow the faint impressions of all of these lives, the way a bed holds the faint warm shape of the sleeper who has just risen, the way a path holds the faint compression of the feet that have walked upon it. The wood of the chairs holds it, the pine of the floor holds it, the plaster of the walls with its soft hairline cracks holds it. The very dust that drifts in the bars of dawn light holds perhaps microscopic flakes of every soul who has ever shed a single particle of itself within these walls. And so when you sit in the corner of such a room, even as a stranger, even as a visitor from a distant century, you are not truly alone. You are surrounded by the gentle ghostly company of all the lives that came before you to this same warmth, to this same dim amber light, to this same slow patient cup. They do not crowd you, they do not speak to you, they simply share in their soft, invisible way the quiet peace that they once also drew from this same gentle morning, and in so doing they make the morning, for you, somehow even larger and more peaceful than it would otherwise be. Stay with me a little longer in this gentle philosophical hush, and let your attention drift now to a thought that has been gathering very softly beneath the surfaces of all the moments we have witnessed together this morning. It is the thought of the strange and unexpected weight that quiet moments carry, the way that the smallest, slowest, most ordinary events of a life often turn out, in the long retrospective light of the years, to have been the moments of greatest meaning, the moments that shaped us most deeply, the moments to which our memory returns most tenderly when we are old. Consider how the world commonly distributes its attention. The world tends to honour the loud moments, the dramatic moments, the moments of sweeping change, the day of a great battle, the night of a famous fire, the morning of a treaty signed beneath crossed flags. These are the moments that the chroniclers of history record in their large folio volumes, the moments that schoolchildren memorize, the moments around which whole nations build their public memory. And yet, when one looks honestly into the slow inner archive of any one human life, one finds that the moments that the chroniclers would call worthy of remembrance are not in fact the moments that occupy the largest rooms within the soul. The moments that occupy the largest rooms are far quieter. They are the moments that no chronicler ever recorded, the moments that no historian ever sought, the moments that the person living them did not, at the time, even fully recognize as moments at all. A woman of 70, sitting upon her veranda in some far autumn of her old age, will not perhaps remember most clearly the day of her wedding, with its great public ceremony and its dozen guests. She will remember instead with a clarity so vivid that it almost trembles in her chest, the small morning some weeks before her wedding, when she stood at her bedroom window watching a single yellow leaf drift down from the live oak in the courtyard, and her mother, passing softly behind her, laid a hand briefly upon her shoulder and said nothing at all. That moment, which was nothing, which lasted no more than 4 or 5 seconds, will turn out to have been one of the great pillars upon which her whole life of 70 years has rested. A man of 60, sitting in his parlour in some long winter evening, will not remember most clearly the day of his greatest professional success, the contract signed, the position attained. He will remember instead the morning many decades before, when his father, on the way to the docks, paused at the corner of the street to point out to him, his 9-year-old son, the way the early sunlight was striking the wet cobblestones and turning them, just for a moment, into a road of pale gold. That single small remark, that single gentle attention turned outward upon the beauty of the ordinary world, will have lodged itself within him so deeply that all his subsequent life of 60 years will, in some unspoken way, have been built around it. And so it is very likely with all of the souls who sit this morning within the quiet walls of the Café Aurore. The small girl who is even now drinking her chocolat chaude at a far table while her grandfather tells her, in the softest of whispers, an old Creole story about a clever fox and a kindly heron, will perhaps not remember most clearly 50 years from this morning the great public events of her life, the elections, the wars, the fires, the speeches. She will remember instead the dim amber lamplight upon the corner of her grandfather's spectacles, the soft warmth of the chocolate against her child's hand, the precise scent of his cologne mingled with the deeper scent of the coffee around them, and the way his voice rose and fell in the slow, beloved cadence of the old story. That single small morning will be one of the great rooms of her old age. She does not know it yet. She is simply enjoying her chocolate. Mademoiselle Levelet, in her corner with her unfolded letter, may yet live to see many great public events, many ceremonies, many announcements, many years of her own quiet domestic life. And yet, when she is old, perhaps in 1908 or 1912, sitting in some quiet parlour of some quiet house, she will most clearly remember not those greater public moments, but this small particular morning of 1855, the dim amber room, the cream-coloured cup of café au lait, the soft scent of the powdered sugar upon her pain perdue, the precise weight of the unfolded letter upon her unsleeved hands, and the soft trembling smile that gathered upon her lips as she read for the third time the question that her future husband had at last, after 7 months and 38 letters, found the courage to ask. Monsieur Devereux, in his ritual reading of the morning paper, may yet live to read another decade of newspapers, perhaps 2, perhaps 3. And yet, when at last he comes to the gentle close of his long life, he will most clearly remember not any single article that he read, not any single political development that he tracked across decades, but rather the long aggregate sense of having sat at this same window, in this same chair, this same dim amber light, with this same slow demitasse upon this same small saucer, for the larger part of his adult life. The ritual itself, repeated thousands of times, will turn out to have been the gift that the years gave him, larger than any single public event ever could have been. This is the strange, soft mathematics of meaning. Loud moments take up small rooms in the soul. Quiet moments take up vast rooms. The dramatic moment lasts an hour and is forgotten in a decade. The ordinary moment lasts a few seconds and is remembered for half a century. The world that pursues greatness pursues in its haste the wrong currency, and finds itself at the end surprisingly poor, while the souls who learn even briefly to honour the slow ordinary moment, the morning cup of coffee, the soft pour of milk, the gentle attention of a friend across a small table, the warm bread broken between 2 pairs of hands, find themselves at the end surprisingly rich. Perhaps this is one of the gentle lessons that a place like the Café Aurore offers without ever speaking it aloud to the slow passers-by of its many decades. The lesson is not preached, not taught, not lectured upon. It is simply embodied in the slow ceremonial brewing of the coffee, in the slow patient pouring of the milk, in the slow turning of the newspaper pages, in the slow gathering of the morning's many small ordinary moments into a single great gentle morning. The lesson is offered freely to whoever will receive it. The lesson is in the end simply this, that the smallest moment fully inhabited is larger than the greatest moment hurried through, and that the cup of coffee in your hand drunk with full attention is, in some quiet and almost holy sense, more meaningful than the most dramatic event of any newspaper that you will ever read. Linger now in this slow philosophical hush a little longer, and turn your gentle attention to a final reflection before we begin the slow drifting back into rest. Consider, if you will, the strange and quiet beauty of the past itself, and the gentle inheritance that quiet places like the Café Aurore offer to those of us who, across so many years, find our way back to them in imagination if not in person. The past is, in one sense, a country to which we cannot travel. The walls of 1855 do not stand any longer in their original form. The Café Aurore, were one to walk down its actual street in our own century, would have changed. Perhaps it would still be a coffee house. Perhaps it would have become something else. Perhaps it would have been lost to fire or storm or the slow attrition of time. The wooden floorboards have aged. The cypress beams have darkened or been replaced. Monsieur Beauchamp has long since been laid to his rest, as has Madame Roussel, as have Mademoiselle Lavallee and Monsieur Devereux, and every soul who sat in the room upon the morning we have been imagining. The cobblestones have been paved over and paved over again. The wrought iron balconies remain in some places, but in others they have rusted and fallen and been replaced by humbler structures. And yet, in another and deeper sense, the past is not lost. It is held within us, within our imaginations, within the soft inheritances of habit and gesture and language and recipe and architecture that the centuries pass quietly down to us from grandparent to grandchild, from craftsman to apprentice, from morning to morning. The slow brewing of coffee with chicory, in the New Orleans manner, is not the property of the year 1855. It is a slow inheritance that any patient soul today may still receive, in any quiet kitchen, simply by attending to the same slow rituals that Monsieur Beauchamp attended to in his 37th year of mornings. The patient lamination of butter into croissant dough is not the property of Madame Roussel alone. It is a slow inheritance still given to anyone willing to fold and rest in the patient manner of generations of bakers. The slow art of reading a newspaper carefully, beginning at the gentlest sections and proceeding patiently inward, is not the property of Monsieur Devereux alone. It is a slow inheritance still available to anyone willing to honour the morning paper, in whatever form it now takes, with the unhurried attention that the old gentleman once gave it at his window table. The beauty of the past, then, lies not in its fixity but in its generosity. The past gives, freely and without conditions, the slow lessons of patience, of attention, of ceremony, of the dignifying of small things. It does not insist that we live exactly as it lived. It does not demand that we put on its clothes or speak its languages or use its tools. It asks only very softly that we remember that there were once mornings like this one, mornings spent in the slow, patient, attentive inhabitation of small rooms, that we remember that human beings have always been capable, when they chose, of honouring the dawn with gentleness rather than haste, that we remember that the cup of coffee, the warm croissant, the soft conversation, the unfolded letter, the gently turned newspaper page were once treated as worthy of ceremony, and that they may, in our own busy century, still be treated so if we choose. There is a quiet inheritance also in the very buildings of such places, in the architectural memory that they leave behind. The high cypress-beamed ceiling of the Café Aurore is itself a kind of teaching. It teaches in its slow, unspoken way that a room may be built to a height that allows the soul some breath. The thick brick walls, with their generous depth, teach that a room may be built to muffle the world's noise and to hold its inner warmth. The tall, slender, slightly rippled windows teach that light may be admitted into a room, slowly, gently, transformed by its passage through imperfect glass into something softer than the hard light of the open street. These are lessons of architecture, but they are also lessons of attention, of pace, of care. And the small ornaments of the room, the embroidered cipher upon the linen, the painted toil upon the walls of the inner alcove, the carved capitals of the cast iron columns, the ceramic forget-me-nots upon the saucer beneath the spigot of the great copper urn, these are not mere decorations. They are small kindnesses, small gestures by long-dead craftsmen toward strangers they would never meet. Small offerings of beauty laid quietly into the corners of an ordinary commercial establishment, in the simple belief that everyday life deserves its share of beauty as much as any cathedral or palace. To honour the past, in this sense, is not to dress in its costumes, it is to receive its slow conviction that the ordinary is worthy of beauty, and to carry that conviction forward in our own small ways into our own ordinary rooms. You, listener, drifting now somewhere in the gentle dimness of your own evening, are also the inheritor of all of this. The slow morning of 1855 has not been preserved for you in any museum case, has not been frozen behind glass for you to peer at from a distance. It has been preserved instead in something more living and more subtle, in the slow techniques of coffee making that still survive in family kitchens, in the slow techniques of bread baking that still survive in patient bakeries, the slow ceremonies of attention that still survive in those who choose, even amid the swiftness of our own age, to set down their devices and lift their cups with both hands, every time you yourself in your own life choose to honour a morning slowly rather than rushing it, every time you choose to drink a cup of coffee with full attention, rather than mere consumption, every time you allow a letter to be received in its proper inner stillness, every time you offer a friend the gift of an unhurried conversation across a small table, you are participating quietly in the same slow tradition that the Café Aurore embodied in its dim amber walls in 1855. You are honoring the same long, patient music of gentle living that has run beneath the louder histories of nations through every century of human time. And so, when at last we rise from this imagined morning and return gently to the soft rooms of our own lives, we may carry with us not only the memory of a slow, dim coffee house in a vanished year, but also the small, quiet inheritance that such places have always existed to give, the inheritance of the slowed breath, the unhurried hand, the attentive eye, the warm cup held with care, the morning honoured as the small and beautiful gift that with the proper inner posture it always has been and always shall be. Now, dear listener, the long slow morning of the Café Aurore has begun ever so gently to ripen toward its softest middle, the hour when the dawn light has fully arrived and yet the world has not yet quickened into its busier rhythms, the hour that the old French grandmothers of the quarter used to call l'heure douce, the sweet hour, the hour in which all the soft things of the morning hang, suspended in the still warm air. Allow yourself now to begin the slow inward journey toward rest, to drift gently toward the soft outer edge of waking, knowing that the room shall continue to hold you with its gentle warmth, knowing that there is nothing more required of you, knowing that the morning shall keep its slow patient watch around you while you slip unhurried into the soft amber of sleep. Let your attention rest, very softly, upon the slow drift of the dust motes through the bars of golden dawn light. Watch how each tiny mote turns weightlessly upon its own invisible current, rising, falling in the slowest possible dance, never hurrying anywhere, never arriving anywhere, never leaving anywhere, simply being gently in the warm light of the morning. There are perhaps 1,000 of them visible at any one time within a single bar of light, and yet none of them collides with another, none of them quickens its pace, none of them grows anxious about its destination. They simply drift and drift and drift in the slow patient breath of the room. Let your attention rest, very softly, upon the slow rise and fall of the steam from the great copper urn. Each thin curl of steam emerges from the small vent in the urn's domed brass lid, rises slowly into the dim amber air, turns once, twice, perhaps 3 times in a small lazy spiral, and then dissolves gently into the warmth of the room, becoming indistinguishable from the larger air, joining itself to the morning. Another curl emerges. It too rises, turns, dissolves, another, and another. The slow rhythm of these curls is so unhurried that one feels one's own breath beginning, almost without effort, to settle into the same patient pace, breathing in slowly with the rising of the steam, breathing out slowly with its dissolution. Let your attention rest very softly upon the slow pulse of the candle flame within the brass-bound lantern at the centre of the room. The flame is the size of a small thumb, golden at its base, paler toward its tip, its edges crowned with the faintest blue, and it breathes almost imperceptibly in the still air, swelling a fraction of an inch upward, then settling, swelling, then settling, with a rhythm so soft and so even that it seems less like a flame and more like the small heart of the room, beating quietly in the dim space. As you watch the slow pulse of the candle, your own heart, somewhere in your own quiet body, begins to ease itself toward the same gentle pace, slowing, softening, settling. Let your attention rest very softly upon the slow swirl of cream into a freshly poured cup of coffee at the bar. The proprietor, with the patient hand of his 37 years, lifts the swan-necked pewter pitcher and pours a thin, slow ribbon of warm cream into the dark coffee. The cream meets the coffee in a gentle white cloud, blooms outward, swirls in slow concentric spirals, lightens the surface from black to deep sienna, to pale caramel, to soft milk chocolate brown. The proprietor lifts a small silver spoon and stirs once, twice, 3 times in a slow, almost ceremonial circle, and the cream and the coffee become one warm colour, one warm temperature, one warm gentleness. Let your attention rest very softly upon the slow ticking of the small mantel clock that sits, almost forgotten, upon a small shelf in the inner alcove behind the curtain. Its tick is not the sharp tick of a railway clock. It is a soft, deep, woody tick, the patient tock, tock, tock. Off an old French case clock made of cherry wood, its pendulum swinging in a long, slow arc behind a small glass door. The tick is so soft that one rarely hears it during the busier moments of the morning, but in the gentler hush of mid-morning, when the conversations have all subsided into the soft murmur of ongoing breakfast, the tick emerges from beneath the curtain like a slow inner heartbeat of the building itself. Tock, 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 marking the slow inner time of the room. Let your attention rest very softly upon the slow turning of a single leaf upon the basil plant in the small terracotta pot upon the windowsill. The leaf is dark green, slightly waxy, faintly veined with paler green along its midrib, and it is turning almost imperceptibly toward the strengthening dawn light in the slow heliotropic gesture that all green things make when the morning sun begins to reach them. You cannot see the turning happen in any one instant, but if you watched the leaf for an hour, you would notice that it had moved gently from facing slightly southward to facing slightly eastward, in the slow, patient prayer that all leaves make every dawn of every day. Let your attention rest very softly upon the slow drip of dew from the wrought iron balcony railing across the street. Each drop forms slowly, gathering at the lowest point of one of the curling iron vines, swelling until it is the size of a small silver bead, hanging, trembling, then at last releasing itself into the air and falling, slowly, slowly toward the cobblestones below, where it lands with a small soundless splash and is absorbed into the slow film of moisture between the stones. Another drop forms, another falls. The slow rhythm of these drops is so gentle, so unhurried, so completely uninterested in time, that watching them one feels one's own thoughts begin to fall, slowly, like soft drops, into the deep still pool of inner quiet. Let your attention rest very softly upon the slow rising of the chest of the elderly gentleman as he breathes between sips of his demitasse. He has nearly finished his newspaper, his coffee is half drunk, his croissant has been broken and partly eaten, and he is sitting back in his chair now, his eyes resting gently upon the street beyond the window, his breathing slow and deep, in and out, in and out. Each of his breaths takes perhaps 4 full seconds to draw in, and another 4 full seconds to release. He is not asleep, but he has entered the soft inner rest of the long morning, the rest of a body and a mind that have been gently and completely satisfied. As you watch his slow breathing, your own breathing settles into the same easy rhythm, drawing in slowly, releasing slowly, drawing in slowly, releasing slowly. The room is breathing, the candle is breathing, the coffee is breathing, the basil leaf is breathing, the dew is breathing, the dust motes are breathing, the walls themselves are breathing, in the long, slow, patient way that warm rooms breathe in long, warm mornings. And you, dear listener, are breathing with them, slower and slower, deeper and deeper, softer and softer, drifting gently, gently, gently toward the warm amber gates of sleep. And now, gentlest of travellers, the long, slow morning of the Café Aurore has reached the soft edge of its quiet horizon, and it is time at last to let yourself drift fully into rest. There is nothing more for you to do, there is nothing more for you to remember, there is nothing more for you to attend to. The morning shall continue without you, slowly, patiently, generously, just as it has continued for 37 years before this one, and shall continue in its quiet way for many more after. You may release it now, with the same gentle ease with which you would release a small soft bird that you had cupped briefly within your hands, watching it spread its wings and drift slowly back into the warm air of its own home. Allow yourself now to drift back very softly through the dim amber room, past the corner table where Mademoiselle Lavalle sits with her unfolded letter, her face soft and shining and quietly transformed, her gloved hands folded once again gently upon the cream-coloured stationery, the cup of café au lait nearly empty, her morning complete. Allow yourself to drift past her gently, gently, knowing that she is well, knowing that her future is gathering around her like a slow, soft mist of warm light, knowing that she shall return to her aunt's house upon Dumaine Street and write her own answer upon her own pale stationery, sealing it with her own family's wax, and that the slow, generous postal service shall carry it, in time, into the hands of the man who has been waiting for it, and that all shall be well, all shall be well, all shall be well. Drift past Monsieur Devereux at his window table, his newspaper now folded neatly beside his plate, his demitasse drained, his croissant finished, his pencil resting upon his small leather notebook, his eyes turned outward upon the slow brightening street, his face the face of a man who has once again completed the long ceremonial reading of his morning and is now allowing himself the soft inner rest that is the proper conclusion of all good rituals. Drift past him gently, knowing that he is well, knowing that he shall sit at his window for perhaps another half-hour before rising slowly, putting on his low-crowned beaver hat and walking with his slow measured steps the few blocks back to his small parlour upon Burgundy Street, where he shall spend the remainder of his quiet day in the soft contemplation of his books and his memories. Drift past the merchant at the bar who has long since drained his demitasse and slipped his small silver coin upon the polished cypress, and stepped gently back out into the strengthening dawn upon his way to his counting-house. Drift past the empty space where he stood, knowing that the day before him is full of honest labour, and that he shall return tomorrow morning at the same hour for the same demitasse, as he has done for the past 11 years, and shall with luck do so for many more. Drift past the clergymen at their small table, whose conversation has gently drawn to its quiet close, who are now rising slowly, gathering their wide-brimmed hats and proceeding with soft footsteps toward the door. Drift past the elderly knitting lady in black whose ribbon of pale yellow wool has grown by perhaps 8 inches since she sat down, and who shall remain at her table until the church bells toll the hour of 10, when she shall fold her work and walk slowly back to her small house upon St. Philip Street, where her tabby cat shall be waiting upon the window-sill watching for her return. Drift past the small girl with her chocolate and her grandfather, whose story of the clever fox and the kindly heron has just reached its gentle conclusion, who is now wiping her small chocolate-stained mouth upon a folded napkin and laughing softly at her grandfather's quiet final remark. Drift past her, knowing that this morning shall settle slowly and surely into the deep, warm rooms of her old age, and that she shall remember it, in her 70th year, with a tenderness almost beyond the reach of words. Drift past the proprietor at his bar, who is even now refilling the small porcelain bowl of rough-cut sugar from a larger crock kept beneath the counter, who is even now wiping a small puddle of milk from the polished cypress, who is even now stepping briefly into the back to murmur some small word of appreciation to Madame Roussel, whose hands are even now shaping the next batch of brioche for the slow continuance of the morning. Drift past him with the soft gratitude that one offers to those quiet keepers of small rituals upon whose patient, almost invisible labours the gentleness of the world depends. Drift past the cast-iron columns, past the hanging brass lantern, past the long damask drapery, past the window-sill with its terracotta pot of basil and its small pile of leather-bound books, past the dove-grey cloak still hanging upon the hook by the door, past the small bonnet beside it, past the green-painted door itself, past the brass plate engraved with the name Café Aurore. Drift gently, gently back across the threshold, back into the soft, brightening dawn of the Rue Royale, where the cobbles are now warming faintly beneath the strengthening sun, where the slow handcart of the flower-seller is now a little further down the street, where the black cat from the cream-coloured townhouse has now curled itself upon a sunny window-sill and gone gently to sleep. Drift further, gently, gently away from the quarter altogether, away from the city of New Orleans, away from the slow brown river curling beside it, away from the year 1855, drifting upward and outward through the slow, soft amber of all the long, warm, patient years that lie between that morning and your own evening, drifting through one century, through another, drifting through the slow accumulated music of all the kindly small mornings that have ever been spent by all the gentle souls who have ever lived. Drift back through them, gently, gently, until at last you come, softly, to the warm, familiar place that is your own pillow, your own blanket, your own quiet evening. You are warm, you are safe, you are held. The morning of 1855 continues somewhere in the gentle archives of memory without needing you to attend to it. The proprietor pours another cup. The candle burns its small, slow flame. The dust motes drift through their bars of golden dawn light. The basil leaf turns slowly toward the sun. The dew drops fall softly from the wrought iron railing. The clock in the inner alcove ticks, tock, tock, tock in its quiet, patient way. And you, dear listener, breathe in slowly, breathe out slowly, breathe in slowly, breathe out slowly, allowing the long, warm patience of that small, dim coffee house to settle fully into the quiet rooms of your own body, allowing the slow, gentle music of that vanished morning to carry you softly, softly, softly into the warm amber halls of sleep where every dim room is welcoming, every cup is full, every lamp is gently lit, and every morning, dear listener, every morning, every morning, every morning shall be slow and kind and waiting, gently for you. Sleep now. Sleep now. Sleep gently. Tanned well. Welcome to Sleepy History with Henry. Here, we harness AI to breathe new life into authentic historical records, creating an immersive auditory experience. This entire production is AI-assisted, crafted solely for relaxation and sleep support. Tanned is not a substitute for professional medical advice. Please do not listen while driving or operating machinery. Now, let Henry and AI guide you on a peaceful journey through the past.